High in the forgotten reaches of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a boy of 8 stands at the edge of an overgrown property, his small hand buried deep in the thick fur of the German shepherd beside him. Ethan Mitchell stares at the dilapidated farmhouse before him, its weathered boards and sagging porch, a stark reflection of his own broken spirit. The afternoon light casts long shadows across the wild grass as his uncle's car idles behind them, exhaust curling into the crisp autumn air. 6 weeks have passed since the accident that claimed his parents. 6 weeks of silence and nightmares in his uncle's sterile suburban home. Now this stranger who shares his blood has driven him across the country to this remote inheritance from a grandfather he never knew existed. The lawyer's words echo in his mind, growing more impossible with each passing moment. The boy must live on the property for 1 year before claiming full ownership. The dog, Ranger, with his unusual coat of deep russet and cream that resembles autumn leaves, presses closer to Ethan's side, his amber eyes surveying their new territory with cautious vigilance. In this forgotten corner of Virginia, they are about to become each other's entire world. The news came on a rainy Seattle afternoon, delivered by a stern-faced lawyer with a leather briefcase and eyes that never quite met Ethan's. Uncle Robert listened with growing interest as the man explained that Matthias Holloway, Ethan's maternal grandfather, had left his entire estate to the grandson he'd never met. 200 acres of mountain wilderness, a house built by hand, and specific instructions that the boy must live there for a full year before the inheritance became permanent. Uncle Robert's demeanor shifted immediately, relief washing over his features. He had never wanted the responsibility of a child, especially one who moved through the world like a ghost, speaking only to the German shepherd that had survived the crash alongside him. The lawyer explained that the property was remote but habitable, with electricity and a working well. A monthly stipend would be provided for necessities. It's what his mother would have wanted, the lawyer said, though Ethan knew his mother had never once mentioned a father or a family home in Virginia. That night, as Uncle Robert packed their meager belongings into cardboard boxes, Ethan sat on his temporary bed with Ranger's head in his lap. "We're going somewhere else," he whispered into the dog's alert ear. It was not disappointment in his voice, nor fear, but the flat resignation of a child who had learned that adults made decisions and children endured the consequences. Ranger responded with a soft whine, pressing his warm body closer as if to shield the boy from whatever came next. The dog had not left Ethan's side since the funeral, sensing the profound emptiness that had settled within him. Uncle Robert appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of awkward sympathy and poorly disguised relief. "It'll be good for you," he offered. "Fresh air, space to run around. Better than being cooped up in this apartment." Ethan nodded, though he knew the truth. His uncle was sending him away, and the wild mountains of a place he'd never seen would become his new prison. The cross-country drive unfolded like a faded photograph album, each state blending into the next as Ethan stared silently out the window. Ranger lay across the back seat, his muzzle resting on Ethan's shoulder, a steady presence against the boy's frozen grief. Uncle Robert filled the silence with forced cheerfulness, pointing out landmarks and reciting facts about states they passed through. When that failed to elicit responses, he switched to rare mentions of Ethan's grandfather. "Your mom never talked about him much. They had some kind of falling out before you were born. She was stubborn like that." He tapped the steering wheel nervously. "He was some kind of scientist, I think. Geology or something. Spent his life digging around in caves and mountains." The journey took 4 days, motels blurring together in a series of identical rooms with humming ice machines and scratchy bedspreads. As they ventured deeper into Virginia, the highways narrowed to state routes, then to winding mountain roads that twisted like serpents through ancient forests. The small town of Oak Ridge appeared suddenly around a bend, a cluster of buildings that seemed frozen in time. Uncle Robert pulled into a general store to ask directions and buy supplies. Inside, conversations hushed as they entered, locals eyeing them with undisguised curiosity and something that resembled concern. An elderly shopkeeper with gnarled hands counted out their change slowly, her pale eyes studying Ethan's face. "You heading up to the Holloway place?" she asked. Though the question felt rhetorical, when Uncle Robert nodded, She pursed her lips. That land isn't meant to be lived on. Some places are best left undisturbed. She looked directly at Ethan then, her expression softening. Be careful up there, child. Ranger, waiting patiently by the door, suddenly stiffened, his ears perking up as if detecting something beyond human perception. His soft whine made Ethan shiver despite the store's warmth. Uncle Robert dismissed the warning with a nervous laugh, hurrying them back to the car. But Ethan felt the woman's words settle into his bones like a cold draft from an open door. They reached the property as the sun began its descent behind the ridgeline, the dirt road ending at a metal gate, half hidden by overgrowth. Beyond it lay a vast clearing surrounded by dense forest, dominated by a 2-story farmhouse of weathered stone and timber. Behind it loomed the silhouette of a massive barn, its red paint peeling to reveal gray wood beneath. The air held a strange stillness, as if the entire mountain was holding its breath. Uncle Robert unlocked the gate, rust flaking from the chain as he unwound it. The SUV crawled up the final stretch of road, gravel crunching beneath the tires like brittle bones. The house was surprisingly solid despite its neglect, standing defiant against time and elements. Inside, furniture draped with yellowed sheets created ghostly forms in the fading light. Uncle Robert flipped a switch, and to their surprise, a single bulb flickered to life overhead. Well, electricity works. That's something. His voice echoed in the empty space. Ethan followed silently as they explored the house, Ranger padding close behind. The kitchen contained an ancient refrigerator that hummed to life when plugged in, and a wood-burning stove with cast-iron pots hanging above it. A pump at the sink produced clear, cold water after several creaking efforts. Upstairs, they found 3 bedrooms, one clearly meant to be Ethan's, with a hand-carved wooden bed frame and a desk beneath a window overlooking the forest. As Uncle Robert brought in their sparse belongings, Ethan noticed Ranger's unusual behavior. The dog stood rigidly at the edge of the porch, staring intently at the old barn, a continuous low whine escaping his throat. When Ethan moved toward the structure, curious about what could be causing such reaction, Ranger immediately intercepted him, using his body to physically block the boy's path, gently but firmly herding him back toward the house. The morning brought weak sunlight filtering through dusty windows and the smell of burnt coffee from the kitchen. Uncle Robert sat at the table, a map spread before him, marking the route back to Seattle with a red pen. Ethan stood in the doorway, Ranger at his side, watching silently as his last connection to his previous life prepared to sever itself. "I've got to get back for work," Uncle Robert explained, avoiding Ethan's eyes. "The neighbor down the mountain, Ray Prescott, said he'd check in on you. His number's by the phone." He gestured to an ancient rotary model on the wall. "The school knows about your situation. They'll send materials for home study." He pushed an envelope across the table. "There's money for groceries. The lawyer will deposit more each month." The words spilled out in a rehearsed rush, practical details masking the abandonment they represented. After a breakfast neither of them ate, Uncle Robert carried his overnight bag to the car. The goodbye was brief and awkward, a pat on the shoulder that could have been mistaken for a gentle shove. "You'll be fine," he said, finally meeting Ethan's gaze with false confidence. "Kids are adaptable, and you've got the dog." As if summoned, Ranger pressed against Ethan's leg, a solid warmth in the chill mountain air. They stood together, watching the SUV disappear down the winding road until even the dust cloud faded. Only then did Ethan's shoulders sag, the weight of his new reality settling upon them. That night, a fierce storm descended on the mountains, rain lashing against the windows like angry fists. Ethan lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the house creak and groan around him. A sudden crash of thunder startled him upright, and in that moment, Ranger leapt from his position on the floor to the window, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. Lightning illuminated the yard below, and for a brief, terrible moment, Ethan saw it, a figure standing in the open doorway of the barn, silhouetted against the darkness within. Morning revealed a changed landscape, the storm having torn branches from trees and carved new rivulets down the sloping yard. Ethan ate dry cereal at the kitchen table, one hand absently stroking Ranger's head, when the sound of an approaching engine broke the mountain silence. Through the window, he watched an old pickup truck navigate the muddy driveway, its blue paint dulled by years of sun and weather. A man in worn overalls stepped out, his weathered face creased with surprise when Ethan opened the door. "Well now," he said, removing his cap to reveal thinning gray hair. "You must be Matthias's grandson. I'm Ray Prescott, your nearest neighbor." His eyes, kind but shrewd, took in Ethan's small frame and solemn expression. "Your uncle really left you up here alone?" When Ethan nodded, Ray's mouth tightened. "That ain't right." He set down a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Brought you some eggs from my chickens and milk from the dairy over in Oak Ridge." Ray's gaze shifted to Ranger, who had positioned himself protectively at Ethan's side. "That's a fine dog you got there. Smart breed, German shepherds. They know things before people do." He knelt to offer his hand, which Ranger sniffed cautiously before allowing a brief touch. Ray's visit extended through the morning as he showed Ethan how to light the wood stove properly and operate the generator in case the power failed. His calloused hands worked with practiced ease, his soft voice explaining each step patiently. "I'll come by daily to check on you," he promised. "It's not right, a boy your age up here alone, but I understand why you'd want to stay." Before leaving, Ray paused at the edge of the yard, his eyes drawn to the massive barn. A shadow passed over his face. "Your grandfather kept that place locked for a reason. Some things are better left alone." As Ray's truck rumbled away, Ethan noticed Ranger had once again positioned himself between the boy and the barn, his intelligent eyes carrying a message Ethan couldn't yet decipher but somehow understood: danger. With Ray's visits providing rhythm to his days, Ethan gradually ventured beyond the immediate surroundings of the house. He discovered a small creek that bubbled through the property, a rocky outcropping that offered views across the valley, and paths worn into the forest floor by years of use. The most intriguing discovery came on the 6th day, when a thorough exploration of the house revealed his grandfather's study, a room Ethan had initially mistaken for a closet, its door concealed in the wood paneling of the main hallway. Inside, time seemed suspended. Maps covered the walls, their surfaces marked with notations in a cramped, precise hand. Bookshelves sagged under the weight of leather-bound volumes about geology, astronomy, and ancient civilizations. The desk, a massive oak piece scarred by use, held stacks of notebooks filled with the same meticulous writing, interspersed with diagrams Ethan couldn't understand. Ranger entered cautiously, his nose working overtime as he investigated every corner. In a locked drawer, which yielded to persistent jiggling, Ethan found a photograph in a silver frame. It showed a severe-looking man with intense eyes standing beside a much younger Ray Prescott. Between them was a strange metallic object resembling an oversized compass with additional dials and markings. Turning the frame over, Ethan found words inscribed on the back: "The needle always points to the truth." Tucked behind the photo was a small brass key with unusual teeth, unlike any Ethan had seen before. He slipped it into his pocket, drawn to it for reasons he couldn't articulate. That night, tucked in bed with Ranger lying across the threshold like a guardian, Ethan dreamed vividly. In his dream, he stood before the barn, its massive doors swinging open of their own accord. Instead of darkness within, a brilliant, pulsing light spilled out, washing over him in waves that carried whispered words he almost understood but couldn't quite grasp. Ray's visits became the foundation of Ethan's new existence. The old farmer arrived each morning in his rattling truck, bringing not just food but knowledge how to stack firewood properly to season for winter, which local plants were edible, how to repair the loose boards on the porch steps. During these practical lessons, delivered with quiet patience, Ray slowly revealed fragments of Matthias Holloway's story. "Your grandfather was a respected geologist," he explained while showing Ethan how to sharpen a kitchen knife. "Worked for universities, mining companies, even the government for a while. Then something happened on an expedition about 30 years ago." Ray's weathered hands paused. He never said exactly what, but he came back changed. "Bought this land from my family, moved here permanent, and cut ties with his old colleagues." Ethan absorbed these details silently, fitting them into his growing understanding of the grandfather he'd never known. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence, Ethan gathered his courage to ask about the barn. Ray's expression darkened immediately. Your grandfather built that after he came back, worked on it alone for months, wouldn't let anyone near it. When it was finished, he padlocked the doors and never opened them again in all the years I knew him. The old farmer straightened, wincing slightly as his back protested. Before Matthias passed, he made me promise to watch over this land if anything happened to him. That includes keeping whoever lived here away from that barn. His gaze held Ethan's, the usual kindness replaced by something urgent and grave. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, boy. Some discoveries aren't worth the cost. Ranger, who had been dozing in a patch of sunlight, suddenly raised his head, alert to something neither human could detect. His amber eyes fixed on the distant tree line, a soft whine building in his throat as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the yard. 2 weeks into his stay at Holloway Ridge, Ethan began to notice peculiar things happening around the property. The axe he'd left by the woodpile appeared on the back porch. A book from his grandfather's study moved from the desk to the kitchen table overnight. One morning, he discovered a complex arrangement of small stones on the porch steps, forming a pattern that seemed deliberate but indecipherable. Most troubling was Ranger's increasing agitation. The normally calm dog no longer slept through the night, instead pacing from window to window, his attention constantly returning to the barn. During daylight hours, he shadowed Ethan's every movement, but would growl and physically block his path if the boy ventured too close to the mysterious structure. When Ray visited, Ethan finally confided about the strange occurrences. The old farmer's face paled visibly, his gnarled hand gripping the porch, railing until his knuckles whitened. "They're getting bolder," he muttered, almost to himself. At Ethan's questioning look, he shook his head. "There are folks interested in your grandfather's work. Have been for years. They kept their distance while he was alive, but now..." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "You should come stay at my farm, son, just until we figure things out." Ethan refused, a stubborn streak asserting itself. This inheritance was his last connection to family, to belonging somewhere. He wouldn't abandon it. That night, he awoke to Ranger's frantic barking, the sound piercing the heavy darkness of the house. Rushing to the window, heart hammering against his ribs, he saw them multiple flashlight beams moving through the trees at the property's edge, converging with eerie purpose toward the barn. Ranger stood with his front paws on the windowsill, hackles raised, his growl a continuous rumble of warning and threat against the unknown intruders circling their home. By morning, the flashlights were gone, but Ranger remained vigilant, his usual calm replaced by a tense alertness that communicated itself to Ethan. After Ray's daily visit, during which the old man seemed unusually distracted, checking his watch repeatedly, Ethan made a decision. Taking his grandfather's journal and the brass key from his pocket, he approached the barn for the first time, Ranger following reluctantly, whining his disapproval. The massive structure loomed larger as they neared, its weathered boards and rusted metal roof creaking softly in the morning breeze. Before he could reach the large padlocked doors, the sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. A sleek black SUV appeared on the property, its windows tinted to impenetrable darkness. 3 men in identical dark suits emerged, followed by a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp features. Her smile didn't reach her cold eyes as she approached, hand extended in practiced cordiality. "You must be Ethan Mitchell. I'm Dr. Eleanor Vance from Geotech Industries." Her voice held the crisp precision of expensive education. "We were colleagues of your grandfather, working on a special research project before his unfortunate mental decline." She gestured to the men, who had begun unloading equipment from the vehicle. "We've come to collect research materials he borrowed from our company. Quite valuable, I'm afraid, and technically still our property." When Ethan mentioned the barn, her attention sharpened visibly, like a predator catching scent of prey. "The barn?" "Yes, that was his main workspace. How convenient that you've located it." Her smile widened as she offered a business card with a handwritten figure. "We're prepared to purchase the property for this amount. A very generous offer for undeveloped land." The number made Ethan blink more money than he could comprehend. Ranger moved then, positioning himself between Ethan and the visitors, a continuous low growl rumbling in his chest. Dr. Vance's smile faltered momentarily, remembering Ray's warning and trusting his dog's instincts. Ethan politely declined. The woman's expression hardened, her cordial mask slipping briefly. "We'll return with the proper documentation," she promised as they departed, her words carrying an unmistakable threat beneath their professional veneer. That night, after securing all doors and windows, Ethan spread his grandfather's journals across his bed. Ranger lay beside him, alert but calmer now that the strangers had left. The earliest entries were conventional research notes about geological formations and mineral deposits. Then, about 30 years ago, the tone changed dramatically. Matthias wrote about the discovery made in a remote cave system during an expedition in Peru, his normally precise handwriting growing increasingly agitated. The artifact defies conventional analysis. Its composition includes elements unknown to our periodic table. Its behavior suggests intelligence or programming beyond our understanding. V. insists we turn it over to military contacts, but I've seen the tests they propose. This isn't a weapon to be exploited. It's a key to something greater. The final entries detailed his decision to hide the artifact somewhere on his property. "I've created a secure location where no one would think to look, protected by the mountain itself. The readings are stable now. As long as it remains undisturbed, it should stay dormant." Ethan stared at the brass key in his palm, its unusual teeth gleaming in the lamplight. The connection was obvious now, this key and whatever his grandfather had hidden in the barn that Dr. Vance so desperately wanted to find. Unable to sleep, Ethan slipped from bed before dawn. Ranger followed anxiously, whining softly but not attempting to stop him. Taking only a flashlight, Ethan approached the padlocked barn doors. The heavy lock was weather-beaten but intact, its keyhole perfectly matched to the brass key in his trembling hand. As the mechanism clicked and the heavy padlock fell away, Ranger let out a single, mournful howl that echoed across the silent mountains, a sound of warning, of surrender to inevitable fate, of a boundary crossed that could never be restored. The barn's interior was nothing Ethan could have imagined. Instead of hay bales and farm equipment, a cavernous space stretched before him, dominated by a massive structure in the center, what appeared to be an entrance to a mine shaft, reinforced with timber and steel, descending into the earth. Sophisticated equipment surrounded it, most covered in dust but some still operational, their lights blinking steadily in the gloom. Tables lined the walls, laden with maps, charts, and instruments whose purpose Ethan couldn't begin to guess. The air felt different inside, cooler, with a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones. Ranger entered cautiously, staying close to Ethan's side, his ears constantly moving as if tracking sounds beyond human perception. On a central workbench lay a journal newer than the others, its pages open to a hand-drawn map. Ethan approached, flashlight beam illuminating detailed diagrams of what looked like tunnel systems beneath the property, with one section circled repeatedly in red ink. Before he could examine it further, Ranger suddenly stiffened beside him. The dog's entire body went rigid, then he bolted to the barn doors, barking with desperate intensity. Through the gap in the doorway, Ethan saw multiple vehicles approaching up the mountain road, the black SUV from before, followed by heavy trucks with equipment mounted on their beds. With no time to investigate further, he grabbed the journal and fled back to the house, securing the barn doors behind him. Inside, he watched from behind curtains as the convoy arrived, men in tactical gear jumping from vehicles before they fully stopped. At their center stood Dr. Vance, issuing commands with sharp gestures, her face animated with a fervor that sent chills down Ethan's spine. This wasn't a scientific expedition or a corporate asset recovery. This was something closer to a military operation. The morning sun glinted off what were unmistakably weapons holstered at the men's sides, confirming what Ranger had sensed from the beginning: these people were dangerous, and whatever lay beneath the barn was worth killing for. By mid-morning, geotech personnel had surrounded the property. Dr. Vance approached the house with 2 armed men and a document she thrust toward Ethan when he cautiously opened the door. "This is signed by your uncle," she stated coldly, giving Geotech Industries access to the property for geological surveys, as stipulated in an agreement with Matthias Holloway. When Ethan refused to open the gate, the men simply cut through the chain, their movements efficient and practiced. Ranger stood at Ethan's side, a continuous growl rumbling in his chest, his body tensed for action. The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Ray's truck, skidding to a halt in a spray of gravel. The old farmer stormed toward the group, his face flushed with anger. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Dr. Vance merely smiled, gesturing to one of her men, who handed a folder to the local sheriff who had arrived behind Ray. The officer reviewed the documents with a frown, then shrugged apologetically toward Ethan and Ray. "Everything seems in order. They have permits for surveying work." As workers began unloading equipment and establishing a perimeter around the barn, Ray pulled Ethan aside, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Your grandfather knew this might happen someday. He prepared for it. There's another way out, a tunnel system that runs under the property. The entrance is in the root cellar." He glanced at the men surrounding the barn. "Tonight, after dark, I'll come back for you." That evening, as floodlights illuminated the barn, and teams worked in shifts, Ethan packed a small backpack with essentials, food, a flashlight, the journal, and a photo of his parents. As promised, Ray returned under cover of darkness, slipping through the woods to the back of the house where the geotech teams weren't watching. Together, they descended into the musty root cellar beneath the kitchen. Behind an old shelving unit, Ray revealed a narrow passage hewn from living rock. Ranger led the way without hesitation, his keen senses guiding them into the darkness as the sounds of machinery at the barn faded behind them. The tunnel was ancient, its walls bearing marks of both natural formation and human expansion. In places, rough-hewn timber supports held back the mountain's weight. In others, the passage widened into natural caverns with ceiling heights that disappeared into darkness beyond their flashlight beams. Ray explained in hushed tones as they walked. "These tunnels go back centuries, first dug by settlers during conflicts with native tribes, then expanded by moonshiners during Prohibition. Your grandfather discovered them while building the house foundation and mapped the entire system." Ethan listened, occasionally consulting the journal he'd taken from the barn, its pages containing detailed drawings of their current path. Ranger moved with surprising confidence through the darkness, his paws silent on the stone floor, occasionally stopping to wait for them at forks in the tunnel, always choosing their direction without hesitation. As they ventured deeper, the crude passages gradually gave way to something different sections with smoother walls carved with symbols Ethan didn't recognize. Ray grew increasingly uncomfortable. His breathing labored not just from exertion but from obvious anxiety. "We're going beyond the sections Matthias ever showed me," he admitted, his flashlight beam trembling slightly. "I don't know what's ahead." Ranger, however, displayed no such uncertainty. The dog moved with purpose, occasionally looking back as if to ensure they were following, his eyes reflecting the flashlight with an eerie luminescence. After what seemed like hours, the tunnel opened into a small cavern where an incongruous sight made both humans stop in their tracks. Set into the living rock of the far wall was a modern door of brushed metal, complete with an electronic keypad lock. Ray stared in bewilderment, but Ethan felt a strange certainty. He opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon, revealing a sequence of numbers repeated throughout his grandfather's notes. His fingers moved to the keypad, entering the sequence with breath held tight in his lungs. The lock emitted a soft beep, followed by the click of heavy bolts, retracting. The door swung inward to reveal a small, immaculate research station, and at its center, resting on a pedestal of brushed steel, a metallic object that pulsed with gentle inner light. The object was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, a metallic sphere about the size of a baseball, its surface covered in intricate engravings that seemed to shift when viewed directly. It emanated a soft, rhythmic glow and a barely perceptible hum that resonated in his chest. Ranger approached the pedestal slowly, his earlier anxiety replaced by what appeared to be reverence, his intelligent eyes fixed on the pulsing sphere. Ray remained frozen at the threshold, his weathered face a mask of shock. "All these years," he whispered, "and Matthias never told me what he really found." The research station was pristine, as if recently cleaned rather than abandoned for years. Computer terminals lined one wall, their screens displaying constantly shifting data. Tables held scientific equipment whose purpose Ethan could only guess at, and bookshelves contained hundreds of notebooks filled with his grandfather's distinctive handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened the one nearest to the pedestal and began to read. According to the meticulous notes, the sphere had been discovered in a sealed chamber deep within ruins in Peru that predated Incan civilization by thousands of years. Initial analysis suggested it was composed of materials not found in the Earth's crust, leading Matthias to the extraordinary conclusion that it was not of terrestrial origin. Most disturbing were the tests documented in later entries, the sphere's ability to generate energy from seemingly nothing, to influence electromagnetic fields, and, most incredibly, to respond to human thought patterns. When I focus on specific images, his grandfather had written, the artifact produces corresponding resonance signatures. It is not merely a power source or a tool. It appears to be a communication device of extraordinary sophistication. Ray moved cautiously into the room, his eyes never leaving the glowing sphere. Your grandfather said he'd made a discovery that could change everything how we understand the universe, where we came from. I thought it was just the talk of an old man who'd spent too much time alone. He reached toward the artifact, then pulled back as if afraid it might burn him. This is why they want it. If this thing can do what these notes claim. His words were cut short by Ranger's sudden alertness. The dog went rigid, his attention fixed on the tunnel from which they had come. They heard it a moment later, the echo of voices and footsteps approaching. Geotech had found the underground entrance. With no time to gather the research materials, Ethan impulsively grabbed the sphere, surprised by its warmth and unexpected lightness. He wrapped it in his jacket and placed it in his backpack, the glow still visible through the fabric. Ray gestured frantically toward a narrow fissure in the cavern wall. This connects to a different branch of the tunnel system. We need to move, now. The opening was barely wide enough for Ethan to squeeze through. Ray followed with difficulty, his broader shoulders scraping against the rock. Ranger slipped through with agile grace, immediately taking point position ahead of them. Behind them, they heard shouts of discovery as the geotech team breached the laboratory. The artifact is gone. Find it. Find the boy. Doctor. Vance's voice echoed through the stone passages, distorted but unmistakable in its fury. What followed was a desperate flight through the mountain's veins, with Ray's fragmented knowledge of the tunnels their only guide. The passages grew narrower and more treacherous, forcing them to crawl in places where the ceiling dropped to mere feet above the ground. Water trickled down walls and pooled in depressions, turning the stone slick and treacherous. Ranger proved invaluable, his canine senses alerting them to unstable sections and choosing forks in the path with uncanny accuracy. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as the geotech team became disoriented in the labyrinthine tunnels, but Ethan felt no relief. A strange sensation emanated from his backpack, a warmth and vibration that intensified as they moved deeper into the mountain, as if the artifact was responding to their flight, or perhaps guiding them toward something. Ray noticed Ethan's expression of concern. "What is it?" he panted, pausing to catch his breath. "The sphere," Ethan whispered. "It's getting warmer, almost like it's excited." Ray's face grew grave in the dim flashlight beam. "Your grandfather believed it had some kind of intelligence, or programming so advanced it seemed alive. If it's active now." He didn't finish the thought, but the implication hung in the damp air between them. Whatever ancient technology they carried, it was awakening after decades of dormancy, responding to stimuli only it could sense. As if confirming this, Ranger suddenly stopped, his head tilted as if listening to a sound beyond human perception. Then, with renewed purpose, he trotted forward into a passage they hadn't noticed, a natural crevice that widened into a tunnel sloping distinctly upward. After what seemed like hours of climbing through increasingly narrow passages, they emerged from a concealed opening in a cliff face into blinding sunlight. Squinting against the sudden brightness, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of a secluded valley unseen from the world above. The small basin was lush and vibrant, fed by a spring that bubbled up from the rocks, creating a clear pool surrounded by wildflowers. At its center stood a cabin, simple but solid, its design reminiscent of the main house but in better repair. Ray stared in astonishment, turning in a complete circle to take in the hidden paradise. I had no idea this place existed. In all the years I knew your grandfather, he never mentioned this. The valley was perfectly concealed, surrounded by steep cliff walls and accessible only through the tunnel they had just exited. It was a sanctuary, deliberately hidden from the world. Inside the cabin, they found evidence that Matthias had used it as a retreat shelf stocked with preserved food, a generator maintained in perfect condition, and most importantly, a satellite phone. Ray immediately called a trusted friend at the state police, reporting the armed trespassers at Ethan's property. While they waited for help to arrive, Ethan carefully removed the sphere from his backpack. In the natural light, its engravings became more distinct, forming patterns he began to recognize from his grandfather's journals: constellations, planetary alignments, and symbols that resembled ancient writing systems from multiple cultures. The sphere's glow had intensified, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. Ranger, initially wary of the object, now sat beside it, his intelligent eyes reflecting its shifting light. As night fell, the sphere's illumination filled the small cabin with a soft blue radiance. Ray sat at the table, studying the journal Ethan had taken from the barn, while Ethan himself stood at the window, watching the stars appear above the hidden valley. A profound sense of purpose had begun to replace his fear and confusion. Whatever his grandfather had discovered, whatever had caused him to spend decades in isolation protecting this artifact, Ethan now felt connected to that mission in ways he couldn't yet articulate, but somehow understood completely. In the quiet of the hidden valley, with only the sounds of night insects and the gentle bubbling of the spring, Ethan studied his grandfather's journal more carefully. The final entries revealed Matthias's greatest discovery. The sphere responded to certain minds, creating a form of communication that transcended language. Children seem especially receptive, he had written. Their neural patterns are less fixed, more adaptable to the artifact's unusual transmission method. That night, while Ray slept in the cabin's single bedroom, Ethan sat on the porch steps, the sphere cradled in his lap. Ranger lay beside him, unusually calm as Ethan sat with the sphere in his hands. Its pulsations grew stronger, more rhythmic. Without warning, a sudden rush of images and emotions flooded his mind. Impressions of vast distances, unfamiliar skies with strange constellations, and a sense of urgent purpose. The connection was fragmentary at first, disorienting in its alienness, but gradually patterns emerged within the chaos. Ranger remained motionless at his feet, the dog's eyes fixed on the glowing object, as if he too was receiving something from it. By dawn, as the first light touched the hidden valley, Ethan understood why his grandfather had dedicated his life to hiding the artifact. It wasn't just a technological marvel that corporations like Geotech would exploit. It was a communication device from something not of this world. Through the broken, incomplete connection, Ethan had glimpsed his grandfather's greatest discovery. The sphere contained a warning about a possible future, one where the power of the artifact was weaponized, its energy harnessed for destruction rather than understanding. The message was intended for humanity, but few minds could receive it clearly. Matthias had been one. Now Ethan was another. When Ray emerged from the cabin, he found boy and dog still sitting together, the sphere now dormant in Ethan's hands, its glow reduced to a faint shimmer beneath the surface. "I saw," Ethan said simply, his voice altered by the experience. "I saw what grandfather was protecting us from." The satellite phone rang at first light, its harsh electronic tone shattering the valley's tranquility. Ray answered, his face growing increasingly troubled as he listened. His friend at the state police had arrived at Holloway Ridge with a full tactical team, only to find the Geotech personnel gone, taking most of their equipment and any evidence of their illegal entry. The property appeared undamaged but thoroughly searched. Most disturbing was the barn. The entrance to the mine shaft had been sealed with concrete, effectively blocking the tunnel system they'd used to escape. "They're covering their tracks," Ray explained, hanging up the phone, "making it look like they were never there." He paced the small cabin, running a hand through his thinning hair. "This is bigger than I thought. Geotech has influenced government contracts, political connections. They can make problems disappear." Ethan sat at the table, the dormant sphere before him. Ranger, a constant presence at his side. The initial fear had been replaced by a strange calm born of understanding. "We can't hide here forever," he said. "And we can't let them get the artifact." Ray nodded in agreement. "The question is, what do we do with it? It can't remain hidden forever, but it can't be surrendered to people who would misuse it." Ethan placed his hand on the sphere, feeling a faint resonance in response. Through his fragmented communication with it, he believed he now understood what his grandfather had intended. "It was never meant to be a source of power or a weapon," he explained, struggling to translate the impressions into words. "It's a key to something greater, something grandfather only began to understand before he died." Ranger's behavior had changed subtly since their night on the porch. He now stayed constantly close to the sphere, as if standing guard over it, his posture reflecting a new purpose that mirrored Ethan's own growing resolve. Under the protective escort of state police, Ethan and Ray returned to the property 2 days later. The sphere, wrapped carefully in layers of cloth, rode in Ethan's backpack, its presence a constant warmth against his spine. The house had been searched but was otherwise untouched, the intruder's professional thoroughness evident in the careful replacement of everything they'd examined. In the study, however, they found signs of particular attention: books rearranged on shelves, floorboards probed for hidden compartments, the desk drawers methodically emptied and refilled. The barn was as reported, its entrance to the underground system now permanently sealed with fresh concrete. The state police officer, a stern woman with kind eyes, pulled Ray aside before leaving. "Corporate lawyers have already contacted the department," she explained in low tones. "They're claiming Geotech has research rights to this property based on a contract with Matthias Holloway from the 1982nd. There's nothing illegal about their survey work, at least on paper." Her expression conveyed what she couldn't say openly: the law would provide no protection against what was coming next. That night, alone in the house with Ranger standing guard at the bedroom door, Ethan experienced another connection with the sphere, stronger than before. This time, he saw not just impressions but clear images: his grandfather as a younger man discovering the artifact, his growing understanding of its purpose, and most importantly, the complete map that had been only partially revealed in the journal. It wasn't a map of tunnels or even the local terrain. It was a star chart marking a specific celestial coordinate, a location in the night sky where something waited for a signal only the sphere could provide. Morning brought Ray's truck rattling up the driveway, loaded with groceries and news. The old farmer's face was animated with cautious hope as he unloaded bags onto the kitchen counter. "There's another group in town asking questions about your grandfather and his research," he explained. "Scientists from Princeton University. I heard them at the diner. They're talking about Matthias differently, with respect, not dismissal. Unlike Geotech's clinical efficiency, these visitors moved openly, conducting interviews with locals who had known Matthias Holloway, their approach scholarly rather than predatory." Ethan, guided by his strengthening connection to the artifact and Ranger's calm response when the visitors were mentioned, made a decision. He contacted their leader, Dr. Amara Patel, and arranged a meeting at Ray's farm, neutral ground away from the property. Dr. Patel proved to be a small, energetic woman with intelligent eyes and a direct manner that immediately set Ethan at ease. She explained that Matthias had been part of their research team years ago, before abruptly cutting ties. "We've followed his published work and the rumors of his discovery," she said, sipping tea at Ray's kitchen table. "We believe he found something of profound scientific importance." Unlike Geotech's representatives, she asked rather than demanded, listened rather than dictated. When she spoke of Matthias, it was with genuine admiration for his brilliance. Whatever he discovered, he was protecting it, not exploiting it. That distinction matters to us. Ethan studied her carefully, noting Ranger's relaxed posture beside his chair. The dog, whose instincts had proven unerring, showed no sign of the tension he'd displayed with Dr. Vance and her team. Taking a leap of faith, Ethan revealed the existence of the sphere. Dr. Patel's reaction was not the cold calculation of Geotech, but genuine awe mingled with caution. If this is what we think, it is a communication device of non-terrestrial origin. It represents the most significant discovery in human history, she whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily overcome by wonder. Under strict secrecy, Dr. Patel and two trusted colleagues examined the sphere at Ray's farm, their equipment confirming what Ethan had experienced directly. The artifact emitted patterns that resembled neural signals, suggesting it was designed to interface with conscious minds. More incredibly, when active, it generated a signal directed at a specific celestial coordinate. It's not just a communication device, Dr. Patel explained, her voice hushed with amazement. It's a beacon. It's calling to something. While the scientists worked, Ethan's connection with the sphere deepened further. The fragmented impressions coalesced into a coherent understanding of his grandfather's final conclusion. The artifact was deliberately left on Earth thousands of years ago by visitors who promised to return when humanity discovered it and understood its message. It was both a test and an invitation. Matthias had hidden it not out of fear but to protect it until the right people could receive its message. They're still out there, Ethan said quietly, interrupting the scientists' technical discussion. They've been waiting, watching our development. The sphere identifies those worthy of contact. Dr. Patel stared at him, then at her readings, her skepticism battling with the evidence before her. The discussion of implications and next steps was cut short by Ranger's sudden growl moments before they heard vehicles approaching. Through the windows, they saw a convoy of familiar black SUVs pulling up to Ray's farmhouse. Dr. Vance had found them again, and this time she had brought reinforcements. Dr. Vance and her security team quickly surrounded the farmhouse, their movements revealing military precision beneath corporate veneer. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered boards of the century-old structure, highlighting the incongruity of high-tech tactical gear against the rustic setting. 6 men in formation, communication devices gleaming in their ears, spread out with practiced efficiency that spoke of backgrounds far removed from private security work. Their eyes constantly scanned the perimeter, hands hovering near concealed weapons with the muscle memory of those accustomed to conflict rather than protection. Dr. Eleanor Vance approached the door with a thin smile that never reached her calculating eyes. A woman whose lab coat had long ago given way to tailored business attire that couldn't quite disguise the predatory intelligence beneath. The farmhouse porch boards creaked under her determined stride, a sound that seemed to echo the tension building in the air. Dr. Patel. She greeted her scientific rival with artificial warmth that crystallized the atmosphere between them. What a surprise to find you involved in corporate espionage. The accusation hung in the air like poison, carefully crafted to establish dominance in the confrontation. Through the screen door, Dr. Amara Patel stood with shoulders squared, her academic demeanor hardened by years of fighting for research funding against corporations like Geotech. Behind her, Ethan pressed himself against the worn kitchen wall, clutching his backpack with white-knuckled intensity, feeling the unnatural warmth of the sphere inside against his spine. His eyes darted to Ray, the caretaker whose weathered face remained impassive despite the danger. Decades of life in these mountains having taught him patience in crisis. When denied entry by Dr. Patel's firm but measured refusal, Dr. Vance's smile tightened fractionally, the only indication of frustration in her otherwise composed demeanor. She revealed her trump card with the theatrical timing of someone accustomed to boardroom power plays, gesturing to a figure who stepped forward from behind her security detail. Ethan's breath caught painfully in his chest as he recognized his uncle Jerome, a man he'd seen only twice since his parents' death, standing uncomfortable but resolute in an ill-fitting suit that suggested Geotech's hasty preparation. The man couldn't meet Ethan's betrayed gaze through the screen door, instead focusing on a point somewhere above everyone's heads as Dr. Vance spoke with clinical precision. "The boy's legal guardian has authorized our recovery of company property," she stated coldly, producing documentation with manicured fingers that belied the extensive laboratory work of her earlier career. "These papers clearly show Mr. Harrington signed research rights over to Geotech Industries 3 months ago, including all artifacts discovered on the property." The legal language washed over Ethan in waves of disbelief, Pieces clicking into place, his uncle's sudden interest in grandfather's research, the unexpected phone calls, the questions about any unusual objects that had seemed merely curious at the time. Dr. Patel counted immediately, her academic appearance undercut by the steel in her voice as she activated her phone with practiced efficiency. Her university's legal team connected via speakerphone within moments, creating an effective stalemate of competing claims and threatened injunctions. The lawyers' voices filled the farmhouse kitchen with technical language that circled around ownership and discovery rights, intellectual property statutes, and prior claim establishments. Ethan's focus drifted from the verbal sparring to the subtle movements around him, Ray's calloused hand on his shoulder, applying gentle pressure toward the kitchen's rear, away from the confrontation. The old caretaker's eyes flicked meaningfully toward the back door, barely visible behind the pantry's edge. During the tense confrontation, with adults fully engaged in their legal battle and security personnel focused on the front approach, Ethan caught Ray's subtle nod toward their escape route. With the practiced quiet of country living, he slipped the backpack straps over both shoulders, feeling the sphere shift inside with a strange anticipatory warmth. Ranger, his grandfather's extraordinary dog who had adopted Ethan with inexplicable devotion, pressed against his leg with intelligent understanding that transcended animal instinct. Together they edged backward through the kitchen as Dr. Vance's voice rose with corporate authority, demanding access based on contractual obligation. The weight of understanding pressed upon Ethan as he silently twisted the old brass knob of the rear door, easing it open just enough to slip through with Ranger at his heels. The sudden mountain air hit his face with bracing clarity as he fled into the surrounding forest, using a hidden trail the old farmer had shown him during their first week exploring the property. Behind him, the farmhouse grew smaller, the voices faded, and the sphere's pulsing intensified dramatically, warming his backpack as if responding to the heightened emotions and danger. The forest enveloped him in protective shadows, ancient trees bearing silent witness to his flight towards something beyond human understanding. Ethan ran deeper into the wilderness, Ranger matching his pace perfectly with the fluid grace of an animal born for this rugged terrain. Pine needles cushioned their footfalls while branches occasionally whipped against Ethan's face, leaving stinging reminders of his desperate flight. His lungs burned with exertion, unused to the thinner mountain air despite weeks spent exploring the property's boundaries. The dappled forest light began to fade as evening approached, shadows lengthening between the towering pines that had stood sentinel over these mountains since before his grandfather was born. The sphere grew increasingly active with each step, its warmth radiating through the backpack material with an intensity that should have been concerning but instead felt reassuring, like a heartbeat syncing with his own accelerated pulse. Pinpricks of blue-white light now escaped around the backpack's edges, casting ethereal patterns on nearby tree trunks as Ethan pushed onward, guided by something beyond rational understanding. He paused momentarily in a small clearing, catching his breath while scanning the rugged terrain ahead. The valley spread below them, the farmhouse now a distant speck nearly lost among the undulating green canopy. Removing his water bottle with shaking hands, Ethan took careful sips while watching Ranger. The dog showed no signs of fatigue, amber eyes alert, fur slightly raised along his spine, not in fear but in anticipation. When their eyes met, Ethan experienced that uncanny feeling that had been growing since their first encounter, the certainty that Ranger understood far more than any animal should, that his grandfather's special companion was something beyond ordinary canine intelligence. "They'll follow us," Ethan whispered, his voice sounding strange in the forest's hushed atmosphere. Ranger's ears twitched in response, his gaze turning momentarily toward the path they'd traveled before looking deliberately up toward the ridgeline. The direction aligned perfectly with the coordinates Ethan had discovered in his grandfather's astronomical journals, calculations meticulously charted over decades of observation, converging on tonight's celestial alignment. The realization struck him with profound clarity that transcended his 15 years. He was being guided, pulled toward a specific location high on the ridge that had featured so prominently in Matthias Harrington's obsessive research. The sphere pulsed more urgently now, as if acknowledging this moment of understanding. Through the backpack material, Ethan felt its vibration change from random fluctuations to a steady, purposeful rhythm. He realized with growing certainty that the artifact was responding to his proximity to the coordinates, calling him toward the exact spot indicated in his grandfather's star map. The mountain paths grew steeper and more treacherous as twilight descended in earnest, loose shales sliding beneath his boots on particularly sharp inclines. Yet Ethan moved with surprising confidence, as if following an internal compass calibrated to this specific journey. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit filtered through the forest, branches breaking under heavier, less careful footsteps, the occasional shout as Geotech's security team coordinated their search efforts. Flashlight beams began cutting through the growing darkness, sweeping methodically across the lower slopes. "Doctor," Vance's voice carried intermittently on the mountain breeze, her controlled corporate tone fraying around the edges as she directed her team with increasing urgency. They called his name with false concern that poorly masked their desperation to reclaim what they viewed as corporate property, an asset to be exploited rather than understood. The night air grew colder as they climbed higher, yet Ethan barely felt it through the sphere's intensifying warmth. His backpack now glowed visibly, blue-white light emanating from within like a captive star seeking freedom. The surrounding forest took on an otherworldly quality in this illumination. Familiar trees transformed into sentinels of some alien landscape. Fauna responded to their passage with uncustomary behavior, owls falling silent as they passed, then resuming their calls in what almost seemed a coordinated response. Small nocturnal creatures pausing to watch rather than flee. The entire mountain ecosystem appeared to recognize something significant unfolding in their midst. Exhausted but driven by purpose beyond simple escape, Ethan's muscles protested as he scrambled up the final approach to the ridge. Ranger moved ahead, somehow finding the easiest path through the darkness, occasionally looking back as if encouraging him forward. The dog seemed transformed in the sphere's light, his ordinary form occasionally shifting in Ethan's peripheral vision to something larger or more primeval. An impression that vanished when directly observed yet persisted in the corners of awareness. They reached a small clearing at the mountain's peak, just as full night enveloped the forest completely. The perfect circle of flat ground, feeling both natural and deliberately crafted, ancient stones arranged in patterns too regular for coincidental placement. Stars blazed overhead in impossible brilliance, the Milky Way a river of light across the velvet blackness undimmed by distant city glow. This was the place. Ethan felt it with absolute certainty that resonated through his entire being. The coordinates from his grandfather's map aligned perfectly with both the physical location and a point in the night sky directly above. A cosmic intersection prepared for this specific moment in time. The clearing was suddenly bathed in brilliant light as the sphere's energy expanded, creating a dome of luminescence around Ethan and Ranger. The translucent barrier rose from nothing, its surface shimmering with iridescent patterns reminiscent of the artifact's engravings, yet fluid and evolving like living mathematics. Within this protective enclosure, the air changed subtly, carrying scents that didn't belong to Earth's forests, vibrating with tones just below the threshold of hearing. The world beyond its boundary seemed to recede, sounds muffling to distant echoes as if the dome existed partially in another dimension. Time itself felt different here, stretched and compressed simultaneously in ways Ethan's mind struggled to comprehend yet somehow accepted. Ranger sat beside him with preternatural stillness, his fur rippling occasionally with blue highlights that matched the sphere's pulsations, amber eyes reflecting wisdom impossibly ancient for any Earth creature. Dr. Vance and her team broke through the tree line 50 yards away, their momentum halting abruptly at the spectacle before them. Weapons raised instinctively, then lowered in momentary shock as the dome's light illuminated their faces, professional composure cracking to reveal raw human response to the undeniably otherworldly. The security team spread out with military precision, though their movements betrayed uncertainty, training providing no protocol for such a situation. Dr. Vance herself stood slightly ahead, her corporate mask slipping to reveal naked scientific curiosity battling with opportunistic calculation. Behind them came Ray and Dr. Patel, arriving breathless from their pursuit, their faces illuminated by the unearthly glow, concern for Ethan evident, yet overshadowed by wonder at what was unfolding. Within the dome of light, Ethan experienced a profound shift in perception as the backpack material dissolved around the sphere, its physical constraints no longer relevant to an object transcending ordinary matter. The artifact rose to hover before him, spinning slowly on an invisible axis, its surface now transparent to reveal swirling energies within constellations in miniature dancing around a core of pure white light. The engravings shifted into new configurations that pulsed with increasing frequency, symbols flowing like liquid metal across its surface, reorganizing into patterns that somehow translated directly into understanding within Ethan's mind, bypassing the need for language entirely. The sphere's final message came with perfect clarity, not as words but as complete concepts unfolding within his consciousness. Images, emotions, and knowledge transferred directly, revealing truths his grandfather had only glimpsed through decades of dedicated study. The visitors, beings of intelligence so vast their physical forms were almost incidental to their existence, had discovered Earth millennia ago during humanity's earliest civilizations. They had not merely visited and departed as popular theories suggested, but had maintained constant observation, watching humanity's development with the patient perspective of beings whose lifespans encompassed thousands of years. The sphere was their method of communication, a test designed to identify individuals worthy of direct contact. A test examining not technological advancement, but something far more important to these ancient watchers, the heart's intention toward knowledge. Ethan understood completely why his grandfather had been chosen decades earlier. Matthias Harrington's pure scientific curiosity, untainted by greed or ambition, had activated the artifact during a meteor shower, much like tonight's alignment. The old man had received the same choice, now offered to Ethan as the inheritor of his grandfather's discovery, and, more importantly, his ethical approach to understanding. The visitors were ready to make contact once more, to share knowledge beyond human understanding, but required a representative, a bridge between profoundly different consciousnesses. The images flowing into Ethan's mind clarified the choice with stark simplicity. He could leave with them, continuing the journey. Matthias was too elderly and frail to begin when his time came, learning the secrets of the universe firsthand in a journey that would transform him in ways beyond imagining. Or he could stay and become the guardian of the knowledge, protecting the connection for future generations until humanity collectively matured beyond its current limitations and was ready for what would follow. Understanding flooded through him with emotional force that brought tears streaming down his face. His grandfather's reclusion wasn't the madness relatives had whispered about, but profound purpose. Matthias chose to protect rather than depart, sacrificing his own opportunity for the safety of many, recognizing humanity wasn't ready for unrestricted access to such knowledge. The ridicule he endured, the isolation, the careful documentation of his experiences disguised as theoretical astronomy, all part of a stewardship he maintained until death with only Ranger as knowing companion. The dog's true nature flickered at the edges of the revelation, not fully canine but something else, a guardian left to watch over the property until the next worthy human appeared, explaining his immediate connection to Ethan upon arrival. Dr. Vance stepped forward into the edge of the light, her face transformed by naked greed and ambition that the dome's energy seemed to amplify rather than disguise. The barrier permitted her approach, yet maintained separation, allowing communication while preserving Ethan's choice. "Give me the artifact, boy," she demanded, her voice strangely distant through the energy field, distorted like words traveling through water. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This technology belongs to those who can use it properly, to advance human understanding, to revolutionize science." The corporate platitudes couldn't mask her fundamental misunderstanding that the sphere wasn't technology to be reverse-engineered, but a conduit requiring specific human qualities. Function. Behind her, one of her men raised his weapon, pointing it not at Ethan but at Ray, the threat explicit without words. The old caretaker stood his ground, weathered face showing no fear, only sad recognition of human nature he'd observed over decades of life. "Doctor." Patel moved protective beside him, her scientific mind visibly processing the implications of what they were witnessing, yet her humanity placing ethics before discovery. In that moment of crisis, Facing the same choice his grandfather had faced decades earlier, Ethan's decision crystallized with perfect clarity, formed not from fear but from understanding beyond his years. The sphere responded instantly to his resolved intention, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment of truth, this test of character that revealed the heart's true priority when confronted with unlimited possibility and terrible responsibility. Ethan chose to stay, to be the guardian his grandfather had been. The knowledge must be protected, shared carefully with those worthy of it, not exploited or weaponized. His decision formed not from fear of the unknown but from clear-eyed assessment of humanity's current limitations. The same technologies that could heal worlds might destroy them in hands guided by profit or power rather than wisdom. The sphere pulsed once with blinding intensity. As if acknowledging his decision with approval, its light briefly overwhelming everyone present, with pure white radiance that seemed to penetrate beyond physical sight into the core of consciousness itself. The dome of energy expanded suddenly, washing over everyone present in a wave of light and information, connecting all minds momentarily in shared understanding that transcended language or individual perspective. For a brief, eternal moment, they all shared the same vision glimpses of the visitor's journey across vast interstellar distances, their patient watch over humanity's evolution from primitive tribes to spacefaring potential, their hope for eventual communion between profoundly different forms of consciousness. The images came in fragments too immense for human minds to fully comprehend. Beings of light and thought occupying multiple dimensions simultaneously, civilizations spanning galaxies, technologies that worked with universal forces rather than against them, ethics evolved beyond concepts of ownership or domination toward perfect symbiosis. Most profound was the visitor's perspective of Earth itself, not as resource to be harvested or territory to claim, but as rare crucible of biological and cultural diversity valuable beyond calculation, a precious experiment in consciousness unfolding at its own necessary pace. When the light faded seconds later, the sphere had transformed, its brilliant energy condensing and crystallizing before their eyes. What remained, floating gently down into Ethan's outstretched palm, was a simple crystalline stone, multifaceted and clear as diamond, yet with depths that seemed to contain galaxies when viewed from certain angles. The artifact appeared dormant but not dead, its energy drawing inward, waiting for the right moment to awaken again when needed. Its weight in his hand felt simultaneously ordinary and impossible, cool to the touch yet occasionally warming in pulses that matched his heartbeat, a silent acknowledgement of the bond now formed between guardian and knowledge. Dr. Vance and her team stood motionless, weapons lowered, their expressions transformed by what they had witnessed. The shared vision had affected each according to their nature. Some looked shaken to their core, worldviews shattered beyond repair, while others appeared enlightened, as if long-standing questions had found answers they never knew they sought. Dr. Vance herself had undergone the most visible transformation, corporate ambition replaced by something approaching humility, her eyes revealing the struggle of a brilliant mind, confronting knowledge that rendered previous understanding obsolete. The experience had changed them all, confronting them with a perspective beyond personal ambition or corporate profit, beyond the limited framework of human economics or politics, a cosmic perspective that made their previous conflicts seem childishly small. What was that? One of the security team whispered, his tactical training useless against the philosophical recalibration occurring within him. No one answered immediately, each person processing the experience through their individual consciousness, yet bound by the shared understanding that would never completely fade. Dr. Patel was the first to find her voice, scientific training providing framework for the inexplicable. First contact, she said simply, her voice carrying new authority born of understanding rather than credentials. Not the first, but perhaps the most important. She approached Ethan with measured steps, respect evident in her careful distance and open palms. They chose you, just as they chose your grandfather. We all saw why. In the days that followed, Geotech withdrew its claims under circumstances that remained mysterious to those not present on the mountain. Corporate documents disappeared from systems, signatures vanished from contracts. The entire legal apparatus that had seemed so threatening now dissolved like morning mist under Sunday. Dr. Vance resigned her position without explanation, disappearing from public view entirely after transferring substantial personal funds to establish a foundation dedicated to ethical scientific advancement with explicit prohibitions against weaponization of discoveries. Those who had shared the mountain vision maintained a connection that transcended ordinary professional relationships, bound by experience no others could comprehend. The university team, led by Dr. Patel, established a small research station on the property with Ethan and Ray as full partners in the project, a collaboration based on stewardship rather than ownership. The barn was carefully excavated, revealing the laboratory beneath Matthias had constructed decades earlier, where they studied both the dormant crystal and the astronomical coordinates it had indicated. Dr. Patel's approach honored the old scientist's methods, expanding his research while respecting the boundaries his wisdom had established. Under her guidance, discoveries emerged that advanced human understanding incrementally, at a pace humanity could integrate responsibly, each breakthrough carefully considered for its ethical implications before publication. Ethan, now understanding his inheritance was never about land but legacy, took up permanent residence in his grandfather's house. The education he received combined formal schooling with wisdom no university could provide, mentored by both academic researchers and Ray's practical knowledge of living harmoniously with the mountain. The crystal, though appearing dormant to instruments and tests, would occasionally pulse with faint inner light when held in Ethan's hands, sometimes responding to astronomical alignments or moments of particular insight. During these activations he would receive fragments of knowledge, never overwhelming, always precisely what was needed for the next step in humanity's preparation for eventual contact. At night, he would often sit on the porch, with Ranger at his side, both of them looking up at the stars with deeper understanding than any astronomy textbook could provide. The dog remained his constant companion, unchanged by passing years that gradually transformed Ethan from boy to young man. His unusual longevity, one of many subtle confirmations of his otherworldly nature. Together they maintained their vigil, guardians of knowledge that would eventually transform humanity's understanding of its place in the universe, not as masters of creation but as one conscious species among many in a cosmic community, waiting to welcome Earth when it finally outgrew its adolescence. In those quiet moments beneath the infinite sky, Ethan felt his grandfather's presence and approval, a connection spanning generations and perhaps even worlds, a bridge built of trust, courage, and the unwavering companionship of the extraordinary being who had helped him discover his true inheritance was not objects or property, but purpose worthy of a lifetime's dedication.